Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. It's Kate Richburg, and welcome to this segment of Free Tip Friday. Well, I am not live today. This is a pre-recorded session, but I know you guys are all going to love this great basic all on macrame. We're going to go over 5 different stitches today, and hopefully by the end of it, you will be a macrame master. So, without further ado today, let's jump in, shall we? Let's go ahead and take a look at what you're going to need for the actual macrame. Now this technique, this macrame, different techniques that we've been using. This technique is really basic to many of the projects right here on beadshop.com, including our Born Yesterday projects, our poetry projects. All of those use this basic macrame flat knot. So I'm going to show you some different ways how to put this together, and then in no time you'll be macrameing like a pro. I know that some of you are already really up and running with your macrame skills, but it never hurts to have a little refresher, right? So I've got some, so let me start by saying what you're going to need for just your basic macrame. And you know, if you're a little shaky on your macrame projects, having a sampler like this, laying your board out, you can see I've got my design board here, and I've clipped all of my macrame, my base macrame right there across, and each one of these is going to be a different basic stitch. So what you're going to need is you're going to need some Chinese knotting cord. Today I'm using 0.5 Chinese knotting cord, and I'm using it in the colors are silver lining, straw, coral, portofino, and boysenberry here. Okay, you're also going to need a few basic tools. All right, you're going to need something to cut your threads, either this thread burner that we've got here, or some cord and thread scissors, or just some simple thread snips, whatever you have around to cut your thread. Then it always helps, this is a great tool, of course, either a beading awl or your knotting tweezers to kind of those stitches where they need to go, okay? And then you need some adhesives. We're going to use some Zap glue, and I'll show you. This has a very specific use when you are working with macrame, or this GS Hypo Cement. Okay, we're going to use that as well to close off your some of your knots and things like that. Okay, so let's jump in with our stitches. What I'm going to show you today, we're going to go across, I'm going to do just a quick demo of all of 5 different stitches for you. We're going to start with a basic macrame, no beads, nothing, you know, nothing too fussy about it, just your basic left and right half hitches to create the full basic macrame square knot. Then we're going to look at the beaded macrame. This is kind of the classic that we use in our Bollywood bracelet. We're going to put our beads onto one strand and bring that strand back and forth across so that our beads are offset. Okay. The third one we're going to do is a similar knot to this basic Bollywood, but instead of having the beads be offset, we're going to have the beads going across from one another. We're going to put beads on both sides of your strands and knot them in. Then we're going to do what we like to call the macrame with a twist, or a twisted macrame. So we're going to do the spiral, and we're going to do that one right here. I'll have some tips for you for the spiral. Sometimes that poses a challenge to people, but it's actually quite easier than you think it is. And then this last one, we called this the beaded bridge, okay? And we add beads, we send the cords through the beads from the right and the left, and we make a little bridge with our macrame. And I'm going to show you that. We do that a lot with different beads other than seed beads, we also do it with our bugle beads, things like that. You see us do it also on the flat leather, the 5mm flat leather. So it's another good basic to have under your belt. Okay, so you can, and as I go along, you may want to do kind of play around with your spacing of the beads. Sometimes you might want to put your beads together in a cluster or have a few more knots in between. That really makes the look of the whole piece a little bit different. So let's just start right here with our basic macrame, and I'm going to be using the silver lining cord. And of course I cut my cord and now it's gone. So I'm going to recut a length of that. I'm going to cut about 40 inches of thread just to give me enough to work with here. So I have a little bit extra, so I don't have to worry about that. And you can always add cord. Adding cord is actually pretty easy in macrame, but I'm going to try not to have to add it. So let me get a little further down. So if this were a bracelet, right, I've got my tails sticking off the end here like so. I'm not going to worry too much about measuring for this one, but if I were doing a bracelet, basically I would get my macrame cord. This is about, I'll measure it for you. This is about maybe 24 inches of cord, maybe a little bit more doubled over like this. And so I'm going to get my ruler and I'm going to say I'm going to macrame about 5 inches or so. And then you want to kind of try it on, see what works, see what doesn't. But I'm not going to macrame all 5 inches on all of these today. I'm just going to do a short section so you can kind of see how those all go together. Okay, so the basic one, what we're going to do is I'm also going to lift my work here using my little spool from my Chinese knotting cord. That gives me a nice little bridge underneath so I can easily kind of work sliding the thread back and forth underneath. So I'm going to find the center of my cord. I'm going to put it underneath that base cord, find the center, which is there, and I'm going to start with my knot. Now, with all of these stitches, the secret is consistency, right? So you're either always going to start from the right or from the left. I'm going to start from the left today, okay, on all of these, just so I'm consistent, but you decide what works for you. It doesn't really make a difference here, okay? So you don't have to tie on a knot or anything to secure this working thread to your base cord. All you do is you just start with the stitch. So you can see I've slid my working cord underneath my base cord at the center, and then I create a loop, and the thread is going under the base cord, around in a loop, over the base cord, and I've got this loop here. Okay, now with this working cord, I pick it up with my right hand and I place it over that thread that's coming out from that loop, right? Then with my index finger of my right hand, I can kind of push it under that base cord, and then I can take my thumb and index finger of my left hand, go through that loop, grab that cord, and pull it through. Okay, so you've formed, you can see that knot with the big loop on the left side. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to tighten. Now, you want to have a nice firm knot, but you don't want to squish your threads down, right? See how the base cords, the two threads, are laying side by side like this? That's what we're going for. So now I'm going to do the same thing, only I'm going to do it in reverse. Okay, so I take my right hand cord, I make that loop like so. See that loop there? And you can see that these shapes that I'm forming, how this looks like the letter P, and the one that I made previous comes out this way, looks like the letter Q. Okay, so you waffle back and forth between the P and the Q or the Q and the P, depending on which one you've started with. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing as I did before, just in reverse. I've made this loop. The tail of that loop comes over my base cord. Now I grab the tail from the other side on the left, pass it over the working cord, under the base cord, and then I grab it inside the loop and I pull it through. Okay, so I've created my second knot. So those are 2 half hitch knots, and they've created 1 full flat square knot. Okay, like so. So let's do it again. I'm going to repeat on the left. Now, let's say, though, that I got called away, right? And I came back to this and I went, oh, which side do I start with? I can't remember, right? If you look at this knot closely, you can see that I have my knot here. This is the first one I tied and the second one I tied. See how there's a little scallop? I'm going to get really tight there so you can see it. There's a little scallop right here that's coming off from where the last knot was tied. That's how I know where I'm going to start my next knot. So I look for the scallop and I go, oh, I'm going to make my loop to match that scallop. So that means I am starting from my left side. So I'll come in, form my loop. In this case, it looks like the letter Q. Bring my working cord over that tail, under the base cord, and up and through that loop. See how I also sometimes just put my finger on that little intersection where all the threads meet? Then I can get that thread up there. Then I can come in and tighten everything down. And you can see how the scallop has gone now to the right side. So I'm going to repeat. Let's go here with our P, our left-hand cord over the tail, under the base cord, grab it up and through that loop, and tighten everything down. Now, sometimes the knot above where you're working loosens a little bit. So what I do is I give that a little tug, and then I tug the knot up nice and tight underneath it. So let's go again. So that's 2 full square knots, going from the left and going from the right. So now here is our third. And you can see I'm going at a little more at what I call Kate speed. But here I've made my Q. See how I put my index finger right in there? And so it kind of automatically holds that loop in place. Then with my right hand, I bring my thread over, under, and then I come in and grab. I put my finger down on where that knot's going to go to kind of hold everything into place, and then I tighten. Then I do the same thing here in reverse. I put my finger there, I get this strand over and under and up through the loop, and pull it tight. Okay, and you just continue on with this knotting style until you've reached the length that you want your knotted segment to be. Okay, so that's it on this one. That's the plane. Let's move over, you guys, to our, what we call our Bollywood or our beaded macrame. Okay, I'm going to cut 40 more inches of this Chinese knotting cord. Remember, I'm using 0.5 in this demo, but you can use any. Experiment with the different sizes. At beadshop.com, we carry it in the 0.4, 0.5, and 0.8. Okay, so whatever fits the project that you're doing best. Whoops, there went my beads all over. What a surprise. I'll put those right there. So I'm going to just place my little spool underneath to kind of pull things up. And again, this cord is connected to my board here. And I'm going to start adding some 8/0 seed beads. 8/0 work really nice for this. You could also use 6/0. They have a little bit of a larger hole, might make it a little bit easier for you. So I'm going to find the center of my cord. Okay, and you can do this before or after, but what I like to do, I'm going to start from my left again. I'm going to tie one, I think maybe two sets of square knots here, just like I did before, and then I'm going to add my beads. Okay, so there's that one. Here's this one. And here's this one. Okay. So now I'm ready to make my loop here. Okay, so I want to add my beads on the side that's going to have the loop, and you'll see why in just a second. So I'm only going to add beads onto this one side, the left side here. So let me get my 8/0. Now, if you like, and you've seen me do this before in different demos, you can give yourself a little bit of glue on these ends, the zap glue, to help you stiffen this needle. And I'll do that with the next ones that I work with. The zap really, because you can see I'm struggling a little bit here, the zap really makes a nice stiff needle on the end. And I'll show you my secret for getting just a really kind of thin, small amount on your on the tips of your threads. So let's see, that's 4, 5. I'm just going to add 6 beads onto the end. You would add, you can add them in segments, like you don't have to add them all at the same time, or you can just, add like 20 beads or however many you think you're going to need for your design. Okay, so that's done, and I'm going to come in and I'm just going to tie a little overhand knot here at the end to keep these beads from falling off. Okay, so now let's go ahead, and I'm on my Q side here to make my loop. I'm going to walk one of those beads up right to, so it sits right next to the knot that I've tied there, that little scallop. And then I'm going to bring this thread over in that Q formation. Okay. Now, with the opposite working thread, the thread from my right, I just repeat the stitch that I did previously. I come over the tail, under the base cord, and up through that loop. And now when I tie the knot, I want to make sure that that bead stays in the loop right there. Okay, so that's done and ready to go. So now if I've done it on the left, I need to repeat it on the right. So now my beads have shifted to the right. Okay, so I slide that one up, I make my loop, and I put the beads on the loop end so I don't have to fling the beads all the way through the loop as I put it through. In the next stitch, you're going to have to do that, but sometimes it's a little bit easier if I don't have to worry about that. So see how these two beads now are offset a little bit. Okay, I'm going to put a pair of stitches in between. So 1 and 2 to space this out just a touch. And now I will slide a bead up. And I'll continue working in that same stitch. And sometimes you have to coax that bead right into place with your finger, but that's all right. The beads stay where you put them. They stay on the strand because you've tied a little knot there at the end. This goes through and slide it up. A pair of plain stitches, 1 and 2. And let's bring our bead back up. And you can see the more you practice, I like doing these little samplers like this because I feel like the more that you work some muscle memory into your hands, the faster that this macrame is going to go for you. And you get your little tricks with your hands like I'm doing here. I come in and tighten, and then I tighten below, right? To get everything so it's nice and consistent, so your tension is all nice and even. There we go. And we'll slide, whoops, I think one of my beads, my knot got a little small. So one of my beads, I think, flew off the end. So let me grab, I was all ready to slide it up, and there was no bead there. So let me get a bead on the end. If you need to cut another little angle on that end to make it, sometimes it can get a little spongy. So let me get it there. There we go. That's on. Slide that up. And let's go ahead and tie that one in. And I'll finish with a pair of knots on the end. I can see that that's a little bit loose, so there we go. There, that looks better. And here you have it. Okay, so that is our flat beaded knot, what we call the Bollywood macrame, the one where we add beads from just one side. So let's move over to the beaded stitch, but we're going to add beads on both strands this time, okay? And the thing about this particular stitch that I like is it really shows the base cord. Okay, so I'm using all one color today for both the stitching and the base cord here. But if you like a little bit of contrast, this is definitely the stitch for you. You can also, if you want the base of your like if you're doing a bracelet or a necklace, whatever it is you're doing, you could make the base with a heavier cord, like this is 0.5 here. This could be 0.8, and it would make whatever you're doing, that strand, a little bit heavier. And then you macrame over the top of that. So you can experiment with that. Now you can see I put a little bit of zap on this baggie, okay? And I pulled my threads through that. And now I'm going to come in and I'm just going to pull my thread through one more time to take away any of the excess. Sometimes I do that if I feel like I've been a little bit heavy-handed with the glue. I still want my CKC to be nice and narrow and thin, so I don't want like a big deposit of glue on that strand. So see how I just grab that bag and squeegee that off. Now the zap glue sets up pretty quickly. It's still a little wet, so I'm going to sit it here for just a moment, and I'm going to cut my threads for my next two macrames, and by the time I do that, I bet those will be dry. I'm going to do the Portofino here for the spiral macrame, or macrame with a twist, sometimes we call it. And then I will, for the bridge macrame, I will cut, again, 40 inches of that. And the bridge, I also want to do that little zap trick for these, because that's really going to help us out in that, with that technique as well. So I'm going to get this baggie right back out, get a little bit of zap down there in that baggie, and wipe the tip off, put this back on. Always put the lid back on because the zap, as I say, bonds very quickly. So we want to be careful not to set anything else in it. See, I set that right in the glue, pinch right maybe above that glue, and then the thread comes out. And I'll do the same thing on this side here. Put it in. Fold that baggie over. And what I do is when I'm working on a project, I keep this baggie folded up so air doesn't get to it. And sometimes that helps the zap not to set up. So if I have another cord end that I have to quickly make a needle on, I can still use that little bit of glue that's sitting down here. Let me squeegee any of the remainder right out. Okay, so those will be ready by the time that I need them. If if I don't glue them to my fingers, which has happened. Now let me come in, and you can see these for the zap, they're ready to go. They're nice and stiffened. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to give myself an angle cut on each of those ends. Okay, so I'm going to find the center and slide my strands underneath, or my one tail underneath, go to the center here, and I'm going to tie 2 square knots, starting with the side. I've been going starting from the left with my loop. And I'm going to go a little faster now, because that basic knot, you should have gotten it down by now, or at least you can rewind and watch the video and get it down, right? But we start with from our Q side, and then I go to the P side there, and then I'm going to make one more section here of plain, like so. There we go. And now I'm going to add some beads onto these ends. Okay, and so here are my ends right here. I'm going to get my beads up in here, and I'm going to hold them together like this, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then I'm going to put 4 on this side. 1, 2, and see how much faster that went than the ones that I did before. 3 and 4. Okay, so now we want to tie our little knots, but we have to bypass this stiffened end. So I'm just going to tie that little overhand knot there. It doesn't have to be super tight, because you might have to untie it to add more beads later, but that's on there. And so now let's do a knot that has a bead on both sides. So remember last time I brought the thread up and I came in, I made the loop, and I tied just with that one bead on the side, right? But this time we're going to bring 2 beads up. We're going to bring one up on the left and one up on the right. But we still start with the loop, right, where it needs to go, there on the left. And then here, I just bring this through from the right, but this time all of the beads travel through the loop. Okay, like that. But the knot keeps them on. Okay, so here's this. And when you tie it with beads going, on both sides, you can see that opening there, how big that is. So if the cord down here, the base cord, was a different color, you'd get a really nice color contrast. And sometimes on the stitch, the bead that's not in the loop, but on the strand that goes through the loop, sits just slightly taller than the bead on the opposite side. But it doesn't make much difference, because it kind of all evens out, because you go back and forth that way. So here's this one. Okay, and so you can see how these two, if I tie them one right up next to each other, see, they look pretty close, and you can see that you've got that you see a lot of cord going through there. So with this knot, if you want to, I'm going to go ahead on the next 2 beads, I'm going to add a little bit of space in between. So I'm going to add 1 full square knot here, once and twice. And then I'll slide these up here and here, and I'll tie those on. And then I'll give myself, I'll do that again, 1 and 2. And then I'll slide these up and tie them in. And see, that gives you a little more space there in between. But you decide what works for you. This is where you can kind of decide your spacing, how you want things to look, etc., etc. Okay, so that's that beaded one, that flat beaded. So we've got these 3 done so far. So now we're going to go into the spiral. Okay, so let me show you what that spiral one looks like. Now, the spiral that's the one that I don't know, always gives me a little bit of trouble, I feel like, because I don't know whether to like just have the top, tied in and then leave the bottom open so it can spin, whatever. But I find that that gets a little confusing. So what I do for the spiral macrame is I have the top nice and tight on my board, and I have the bottom. I'm going to clamp in the bottom like so, nice and tight, and I'm going to lift my cords up with my little bobbin right here. Okay, I'm going to bring my thread in from the center and then bring it up. Now remember how we were working from left to right and right to left on this stitch? In this stitch here, we're just going to work from one direction. We're going to loop from one direction and continue going down. Okay, so on this side, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go to the left. I'm going to loop to the left, loop to the left, loop to the left. All right, so I'm just going to start. I've made my loop, found my center, loop around, the tail comes over the base cord, get my working cord from the right-hand side, over the tail, under the base cord, and up and through the loop. Okay, so there's number one. Now I'm going to repeat that. Left, over, under the base cord, and through. These first two might be a little fussy, so just tighten them up, tighten your tension as you need. I'm going to do that again. And I find that kind of pushing that down, putting my finger on those knots kind of keep them where I want them, kind of keeps the tension even. Now, after about 4 of these knots, can you see how this is starting to turn? But don't let that freak you out, right? You're just kind of continue. There's my left. I go over and through and tighten. So essentially, the cord is spiraling, but you kind of force every knot that you tie to kind of face up to you, if that makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to do it again. There's my loop, and I go over, and I go under. Put my finger down there and tighten it up. And so let the cord twist. Don't you worry about twisting your hands or the cords that you're tying with, if that makes sense. So can you see how this is really starting to twist? Let me keep going. I'm going to kind of do this as rapidly as I can, and then you can kind of see how this is going to come together. But I think the secret to this, when you're bringing this around and tying, is that this base cord is nice and taut on your board. Okay, that gives a little bit of spring to this and just helps the stitch kind of spiral in a nice even direction at a kind of a regular interval. Okay, so that's it for that. Now, if you wanted to, you could go back and forth between this spiral and see how I'm just kind of coaxing it into shape there. But as I would come around and tie it, I'd pull that to the front. Okay, so that's the first thing. You don't want to switch these sides. If I let it go and, came back to it, I'd pull this to the front like this and then tie my next knot. Now, all you have to do to get back to tying the regular flat knot is you just start going back and forth between the left and the right hand cords. But that's it for that one. Okay, that's how she looks. And I like the spiral a lot. And I think just really conquering it with that nice tight base cord, that's going to make all the difference if you've had trouble with it previously. There we go. Okay, so let's look at our final, I think we're on our final stitch there. So I'm going to lay these all out here, and let's go to this tunnel, or what we call the bridge. Sometimes I call it the tunnel, but either way, the result is the same. So now with this one, we're going to add beads through both, we're going to send the cords through both beads. Usually we do this on cord that's a little bit wider, right? So that your beads kind of go across here. So what I'm going to do here, I think, is I'm going to add a second strand of the Chinese knotting cord, the boysenberry, to kind of give myself a little more of a base to macrame around. So I've got 2 cords here, okay? And I'm just going to take both of these together. And what I really want to do here is I want to make sure that my cords are sitting nice and flat. See that? It gives me a nice base to work on. Okay, let me get my little bobbin underneath there. And now I've got my Chinese knotting cord, my strand here. I'm going to find the center, put that strand underneath, and I'm just going to come in and I'm going to make two sets of macrame stitches, and see how I'm coming in and they're a little bit wider because the base cord is a little wider. Okay, and your base cords scrunch up a bit. Scrunch is a technical term there, but you kind of want to make sure that you're keeping them kind of flat there. Okay, so let me get a little tighter so you can see what that looks like. See how that's nice and how those stitches are a little bit wider with 2 base cords underneath than it was with 2 sets of base cords, 4, rather than just this single one with the 2 cords. Okay, so now let's get that 8/0. All right, I'm going to lift that up. Let's get a couple of 8/0. I'm going to get 2, and I'm going to go in. And I hope that these are going to be big enough. I'm going to cut that at a right angle. If they're not, I'll switch beads, but I have a feeling I'll be able to get these through. So here's my 8/0 here going through. I've gone through from the left to the right. Now I'm going to pick up my cord from my right hand side. I should have cut that at an angle beforehand. There we go. I'm going to come from my right and go in on the opposite direction. Okay, and these are a little tight, but they go through okay. You can always substitute a different bead for this, but you can see those stiffened needles really work out. So here's my ends, and I just kind of hold those in place really like this and pull the ends. And as I tighten them, sometimes the Chinese knotting cord wants to twist. So this is where your awl comes in handy. Let me get it down there a little bit so you can see it. I'm going to kind of pull this back a little bit. See, that issue is that this cord isn't where it should be. There we go. And let me make sure that this cord on this side is where it should be. There we are. And see how those just kind of sit right on the top there. All right. So you can also do this with the base. What we've done in the past is we use Ceylon rather, in fine. That also works really beautifully for this kind of bridge lettering. This is the CKC in fine, which could go over the top there as well. You could also drop this down from a 0.5 to a 0.4, which would work very nicely. So I'm going to come in and I'm just going to tie 2 plain stitches here, like so, and then I'm going to repeat. So I'll get my 2 beads. This could also be a bugle bead, right? The bugle bead, the holes on the bugles, I think might be just a little bit smaller. So you definitely want to go down a Chinese knotting cord size, or go to the seal-on. So here we go. They just slide right on there. These zap needles are super tough. And I'm going to slide these in. There we go. Kind of make sure it's even. There we go. I didn't have that same issue because I just kind of coaxed those threads a little bit better this time, because this is practice. So you improve with each stitch. Tighten that one down, tighten this one down. Let's go ahead and let's do one last one, shall we? 1 and 2. Again, see that nice angle cut that's on that thread? It gives a really nice end to go through your beads. Let's get that opposite end. And see, I'm really pushing those A dots up against my finger, so I'm opening that tunnel of the bead hole up as much as I can to get this second strand through. Okay, and I pull them. They like it better, I think, when it has a little bit of room. There we go. And then I just tie my loop as if these beads weren't even there. So I come here and through and tighten, and then I do this again. Repeat the stitch and tighten. Okay, and you can continue that down and create just that little series of bridges on your piece. Okay, so let me get, of course, all of my strands that I've just made have just ended up on the floor. So let me get these guys, and we'll take a last look at all of these variations on a theme here. Okay, so here's the gray, or the one in silver lining, the plain. I'm going to clip it so they don't go anywhere. There we go. And we have that beaded, the beaded flat, that's not it. This one is it. That beaded flat knot with the beads offset on both sides. And then we'll go to the beaded flat knot with the beads across from one another. There's this guy. And then we'll go to the macrame with a twist, or the spiral knot. This one, remember, I started from the left-hand side, that one direction, but it doesn't matter if you start from the left or the right. You just need to be consistent with it. And then this last one is the bridge with the 4 base strands at the bottom, and then the A dots going over the top in a little bridge formation. And you can decide the spacing on this one as well. Okay, and just a reminder, the colors that I used the 0.5 millimeter Chinese knotting cord in silver lining, straw, coral, portofino, and boysenberry. And then the bead that I used is an A dot. It's the galvanized silver. It's the 8-4221 is what I used. So that's it. So I hope that this this little demo here that I did for you helps you with your macrame skill builders, and you can refer to it anytime when we do macrame projects here at beadshop.com. beaded.com. So I wanted to say thank you all so much for watching me today. You can find all of the information on the project and the products that I used on today's broadcast right on our website at beadshop.com. Make sure that you sign up for our newsletter, you guys, for the latest discounts, giveaways, and new products. We have new things coming down the pike all the time, so you don't want to miss that newsletter. That's how we stay connected. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining me today on this not live Free Tip Friday, but I will be back next week with a very, very special project that you're not going to want to miss. So have a really great, creative, fantastic weekend if you're watching this live. We really appreciate you. We couldn't do this without the support of our loyal and wonderful customers. So thank you so much from all of us on the Bead Shop team, and I'll see you all next week. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.